Hi there, Rob Zachney for IGN here, and I just reviewed Company of Heroes 2's newest expansion, The British Forces. And right off the bat, I have to tell you it's a bit of an odd expansion. It's a standalone, but it gives you a multiplayer army that you can take into skirmish battles and online battles against the already existing multiplayer armies in this game. So the British Forces are meant to sort of join the roster of World War II armies in Company of Heroes 2 that already includes the US Army, the Red Army, the Eastern Front Wehrmacht, and the Western Front German Army, Oberkommando West. The British are sort of designed to be the most defensive-oriented faction in this game. Their early game, which you can see here, is sort of driven by their really powerful infantry, which, if they get into cover, become far deadlier than when they're out in open ground. And so the British actually have a very strong early game if they are well handled, because their infantry can win a lot of straight-up firefights against enemy troops and sort of establish early map control. And that's really important because I think the thing that really sticks out in my mind and characterizes the British Army is this mid-game lull. If you imagine sort of their power curve, their potential in the game, it would be this big U shape. Very early on, they've got the great infantry that's great for seizing control of the map, but then you really have to recognize the moment you're starting to get into the mid-game, because then the British start to get into real problems because they simply don't have great options when it comes to early armor. So with the British Army, you're going to be spending a lot of time, as soon as you've established some presence on the map, digging those fortifications, getting infantry into heavy cover, getting machine gun nests set up, using engineers to build fixed positions, anti-aircraft guns, anti-tank guns, laying minefields. Because the British really need to set up the battlefield and control the battlefield if they're to have hope of sustaining the onslaught they're about to face. The British have a major weakness in that they're not terribly maneuverable. Their tanks are pretty good, but their tanks are mostly meant to support their infantry and are actually at their best fighting enemy infantry. So what the British don't have is a great option when it comes to like assault guns. They don't have a great option when it comes to tank killers. The British dedicated tank killer is really expensive and actually a bit ineffective at the role. It's got a very slow-firing cannon mounted on a turret that rotates at the pace of a glacier. So if you miscalculate with that thing at all, it's going to lose a shootout with German tanks. So in the mid-game, a lot of the British Army is playing the British Army well is about responding to crises, watching these enemy breakthroughs happen, and having your infantry just hold on inside their defenses while you rush reinforcements to the area. It's really tense. It makes for a lot of really demanding encounters. It can also make for a little bit of frustration because there are times it just feels like you're getting bull rushed aside by the enemy tanks. On the other hand, the British have a few ways to respond to that. They've got three army commanders: the Royal Engineers, the Royal Artillery, and the Commandos. And each of those is a bit self-explanatory. The artillery commander gives you lots of defensive powers, lots of heavy artillery that you can sort of call down anywhere on the map to help yourself hold positions. The engineer makes your structures more durable and also gives you buffs to your armor. And then the commando is more about empowering that fantastic infantry and also making the British even more maneuverable, more dynamic, and a little better at harassing the enemy. And the thing I find about playing the British is that I feel like I'm using all those things very situationally, which makes them a really fun faction, because playing them you have so many options, both in what units you decide to build, and there are certain unlocks for buildings that will determine what late-game units you can even construct, but then also what commander you're going to choose, what kind of game you're going to end up playing. And so I'm often making like major decisions when it comes to which commander am I picking, which units am I bringing out. I'm making those decisions in the mid-game, heading into the late game, as I try to figure out how I'm eventually going to win this game. And that means they've stayed fresh. I've been playing this army for, a pretty solid week and playing them very extensively. And In this regard, they are a standalone faction. I haven't missed playing any other factions in the last 10 days. They're a great army that force a lot of different challenges on you that you have to master. I've figured out a few ways of playing them. I feel like there's a lot more depth to this faction that I still have yet to uncover. So that's really exciting. When it comes to whether or not you should pick this up, I think it's an easy recommendation for people who are already into Company of Heroes 2. And as someone who sort of got away from the game, the British forces have sort of rekindled my passion for the game. It started me on a Company of Heroes 2 renaissance. But I'm not sure that it's a great thing for someone who's completely new to the game. I think it's cool that it exists as a standalone option. And if you're really not sure about Company of Heroes 2 and whether or not you really have a place for it in your gaming life, this is a good way to get your feet wet. On the other hand, it is kind of a nerfed version of Company of Heroes 2. You can't play the other factions, which means you really don't understand how the game works. You're playing against them, but you don't fully understand the dynamics driving their decision-making. That's kind of a major problem in RTS games, and I think it's endemic to what Company of Heroes 2 has sort of become as opposed to Company of Heroes 1. Company of Heroes 2 has sort of been this ever-expanding RTS with tons of DLC and lots of cool new armies. And that's great, but that also means that it's become a bit of a DLC Christmas tree. And at this point, it's a little bit hard to sort of get the entire Company of Heroes 2 expansion. As a point of entry, the British forces is okay, but it will be confusing in certain ways that owning the core game is not. That said, the faction is still so much fun and so demanding and forces so many different skills on you that it really does offer a lot that's new to Company of Heroes 2. And I easily recommend it to anyone who is a fan of Company of Heroes 2. I think if you are trying to get your feet wet and trying to get into the game, I might point you at the single-player expansion, Ardennes Offensive, rather than diving in with the multiplayer in the British forces. Either way, I think it's a very successful expansion to an ever-improving RTS, and I give it a strong recommendation of 8.0. For all your World War II real-time strategy needs, keep the dial tuned to IGN.
Fighter bombers ready to strafe targets of opportunity in target area. Bombers incoming. The Tactical Air Force is sending support.
That's it. The sky is ours. Air support is here.